So greetings world. I'm Steve, and this is Bernice, and we are from a group in Australia called Basic Income Australia, and we've been talking about internally in the group about universal basic income and trying to basically get it to happen. But Bernice here brought up an interesting point that I wanted to try and discuss and get the discussion out there about having universal basic income and how it works with children. For some background, the group has been trying to develop a proposal which we can submit to the government and use for marketing, which has attempted to determine how much funding and how we'd actually fund it. And one of the problems we've come up with is that it's really expensive. You're talking with $20,000 a year for Australia. Just with all of the adults, it's about $400 billion. And after fiddling around with sort of offsetting from what are they? Social Security, the pensions and all that, you can actually get the price down to, with my calculations, around about 130 billion. And the rest has to come in from basically a sovereign currency, and there's other ways of managing that. But the point is that still leaves around 5 million children who don't get support directly. They'd have to get it from their parents. And this is, yeah, one of the ideas we want to sort of talk about today and see what people are, see what people think of this. So, yeah, Bernice, can you tell us a bit more? Well, tell us a bit about yourself for a start. And
it's kind of,
you're a regular Aussie.
I'm a regular Aussie. I'm a regular Aussie in that I'm a migrant to the country. I was actually born overseas in Dubai to Egyptian parents.
Okay.
So we came to
Egypt?
Australia.
Did you say?
Egypt, yeah.
Egypt. Okay, cool.
You didn't know that. I hadn't told you that.
No, I did not know that. I did not know that.
You've just learned something completely new. Oh. So yes, I'm like 25% of Australia, where in that I'm a migrant to the country.
Cool.
But I've been here 30 plus years. I came as a kid, grew up in Perth, moved to Melbourne about 10 years ago. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm pretty much a dinky die Aussie.
Yeah, I was, born in Werribee in Victoria.
Okay.
And then we
around the corner.
mainly grew up in Perth as well. So from, I think, age 5, we settled there up until I was about 30 when I flew around the world. And then when I came back, I ended up in Melbourne. So, yes.
It's a great city. So
well,
I'm very glad I moved here. So that's in terms of, I don't know, cultural background, I suppose. In terms of what I do, I am a business analyst. I specialize in pulling apart data and pulling apart processes and pretending to try to make it make sense at the end of it all.
And trying to figure out how businesses can make money, basically, or stay profitable, that sort of thing.
Yeah, let's go with that answer.
Well,
pretty much.
So do you have kids yourself?
Unfortunately, no. I would have loved to have children.
Okay. So it can't happen. Well, that's a worry.
Well, we don't know. We'll see.
You'll see. Okay. Well,
life's not over yet.
I mean, I'm a super geek, so I pretty much live at home and work, and I have no social life. So, kids aren't a thing for me either, which is like, okay. So again, half the reason I'm here is because I have actually done a lot of economics research. I'm an engineer by trade, but again, I wrote a book about economics a while back, and again, that's sort of what my proposal was based on. But yeah, to get to the topic, about 400 billion with children for a UBI, and probably 500, maybe 550, or without children, 550 with children, 400 without. So it's a lot of money. So one of the ways you can, cut the cost of that budget is to kick out the kiddies. But as you rightly point out, they're actually kind of costly. So,
well, it's more than that. They're kindly costly. It's a position that society needs to decide on. I am a very firm believer that a society's future lies in its children. So if you don't set the children up right, then you've got fun upcoming.
The song, I believe the children are the future. No, all of that one. So, okay.
Yeah.
It's a popular topic.
So I'm coming about it not so much from the cost perspective, because cost is a really funny thing. We're very good at counting costs that are visible.
Yep.
And we're very bad at counting costs that are invisible.
Yep.
So some of the things that we are not counting, for example, is if a child is not properly nourished and goes to school hungry, then they're not going to learn. And even though we're providing them with education, what's the point? Nothing's going to go in their head.
So
they're going to not be they're not going to be as productive a member of society down the track.
Yeah.
So it feels very much like when we talk about children that the conversation can very easily devolve into a, what is it, penny wise but pound foolish kind of a situation. So I prefer to go, well, hey, wait a minute. If we concentrate on if the UBI is provided to children as well, well, what does that give us? And then is it, and then, it gives us all these wonderful things. So how would we go about funding it? Sure. Just like we do anything else in our lives. We turn around and we say, I want this. Okay, how do I go about funding it? I don't go, how much is this going to cost me? Oh, no, I won't do it. It's usually the other way around. So we find a way of making things happen.
Well, I mean, I try and look at my finances and say, no, I can't afford shit, which is why I live in a crappy apartment and
so maybe that's the difference between you and me.
Yeah, well, so, but yeah, I mean, I certainly do spend a bit of money on things that I enjoy and whatnot, but kids are supposed to be a bit more than that. Some of the, I mean, so to play devil's advocate, what I can say is, okay, well, you're giving kids, I mean, potentially the $20,000 a year to spend on themselves. So I can see that going in two ways. One is they're just going to waste it on toys and whatnot.
Well, I'm not saying that the money would go directly to children.
Well,
but they need to be accounted for, because they still need a roof over their head, foods on the plate, clothing, and yes, toys, because we need to get them to a point where they socialize, so they don't have to interact with the world. They're important play.
So yeah, there's on the downside, yes, you know, they might waste the money, but on the upside, it may actually.
Who are you referring to?
Well, children, if you give them money themselves, they just blow it on lollies and get fat, and you know. So if they have direct control over the money, so.
It never occurred to me that we would give the money directly to the children, because
just discussing
there's a reason why we have the driving age being the driving, the drinking, the voting age being 18. As a society, we've determined that prior to that age, children
aren't as responsible for their actions, that kind of thing.
Well, there's that, but I was going to go for they're not knowledgeable enough yet. They don't know enough about the world to be able to interact with it. Now, there are arguments for bringing it down to 16. Maybe, but what's the proper age? That's a different conversation. Let's assume that 18 is the age of being responsible for yourself.
Yeah, well, from the statistics that I've got, it's 15 plus is actually 20 million adults. So there's about 5 million people younger than 15. So it's a little bit more than that. In terms of 18 or less. Whoops, that sounds like some fun you're having there.
The neighbours having fun.
Oh, good.
They're trying to
as long as there's no
something
blood
together. It's not working so well.
Whoops. Yeah. So obviously, children who are just born, etc., aren't going to be able to spend money like that anyway. So you've got to have the parents and things, or the guardians to help manage it, at least for them or something. So
and we're saying that, so to me, it would make sense that the money would, of course, be paid to the parents. And yes,
Yeah.
you'd have money being paid for a child that's just newly born. And that I sometimes get the sense that people turn around and go, oh, yeah, but when they're newly born, like they just sleep all the time. But
Well,
they don't
it takes
cost
up.
that. They don't.
It
They
also
don't
takes
cost
up
that.
the adults the time they need to work and things like that.
Exactly.
So there's lost productivity in that regard. But
Wait a minute. There's an assumption. There's lost productivity in that regard. What productivity is more important than raising a child?
oh, absolutely. The thing is, you're not getting paid to be a parent. So it means, I mean, it does come down to financial things, but basically, if people do have, paid childcare, they can spend more time benefiting their children rather than actually, wasting time
Or just
drawing
plain downtime.
pie charts. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we've had 2 years of lockdowns and craziness. And what I'm seeing, at least in Melbourne, is everybody is so extremely exhausted.
Yeah.
Downtime is extremely important because it allows people to refresh, rethink, and manage the stresses that are coming. So what is to say, I think, like we turn around with UBI for adults, we're basically turning around and saying the person can spend it where they see it will provide them the most benefit.
Yep.
It's the same with parents. They will spend it where they think is of most benefit. Now, whether most benefit is to get someone in to look after the child for a couple of hours so that they can have some downtime, or whether the benefit is for them to put them in childcare so that they can go to work, whatever, but it gives the options.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the same conversation as we would have it for adults, but a little bit more, well, to take into account the needs of children.
Yeah. So, I mean, certainly from the research we've looked at, the Namibia study was one of the big ones. When you do implement a UBI, there's like an 8.5% decrease in hospitalizations for all people, and like a 4.5% increase in birth weight. Now that's, Namibia is obviously the middle of Africa, but basically what that means is less stress for the mother, means you end up with a healthier child.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, so the majority of research out there shows that in terms of health and the social benefits of UBI, it's a no-brainer. It's worthwhile doing. Throwing in the children to the mix, whether we should.
Well, wait a second. You're saying throwing the children into the mix. Whenever I've read about the UBI, it never, ever occurred to me that children wouldn't be part of the mix.
Yeah.
It was only when I started talking in the group that I realized,
oh, we're not considering children. Yeah. And again,
and so,
the main reason,
when we've spoken about the UBI, does that mean that others also think that it doesn't include the children?
Yeah.
It just, as I said, it never ever occurred to me that it wouldn't include children. It came to me as quite a shock that there would be people who would consider a universal basic income as excluding children. Sounds like an anathema to me.
Yeah, that's a bit of an oxymoron there. Yeah. But yeah, again, the main reason you cut the children out is to save that extra $150 billion.
Which brings us back to the, are we being penny wise?
Yeah.
No, it brings us back to, are we being penny wise bound foolish? Are we actually saving in the long term? Those are far more healthy conversations to be having than, oh, you increase the cost. Yeah, of course you increase the cost. But the thing is, are we reducing it in the long term?
Yeah. So, and again, the only way,
and even if we are, increasing,
how the benefits of it. Sorry, we're talking over each other. The only way to tell the benefits ultimately is to implement it and see what happens.
Actually, I'm wondering the previous experiments that have been done in all their various forms around the UBI, have they included or have they excluded children?
For the most part, no. I think it's just adults. The longest running one, Alaska, is basically they're getting money from their oil resources. Amounts to about $10,000 a year, but I'm pretty sure that's only adults. most of the trials that I've seen have been adults who are, you know, unemployed.
Mhm.
And there's most of the African Indian studies were all adults as well. So,
Okay.
so, and again, I think the main reason we don't is because it just saves so much cash. But I think it's a good point. Should we be paying for the children? And I can throw up some, I'll share my screen here, and I can just press that button and window, that one. So I want to show you a couple of things here. This one is from the OECD. So that's the top 20 countries in the world, or
Yep.
the European countries. And it is fertility rate. So how many children per woman?
Yeah.
So most of the
And
countries, sorry, say again?
I said, and the replacement rate is something like
2.1.
2.3 or 2.1 on the brain. Okay. I don't know why I had 2.3, but close enough.
Yeah, well, depends on the child mortality rate and a few other things like that. But basically,
That's
back in
true.
the 70s, we're at 2.95, and it has decayed and sort of dropped down to below 2.1 in like 1974. And then it has stayed, you know, 1.9, 1.8, 1.7, all the way up to now where it's currently about 1.66.
Yep.
So my, from my research in terms of economics, my feeling is that economically people feel that they can't afford to have kids. So that's one of the top sort of 3 reasons that people, or top 3 direct reasons people say they don't want to have children. You know, they can't afford them, they can't find a partner because we're all too busy working. And I think the other one I can't remember, but basically in terms of actual population growth, we're decaying. And 1.6 is around a, I think it's about a 10-20% decay rate per generation. So in 60 years, so I think it comes out to about like a 1-2% decrease in population per year, which we're only picking up because of
migration into the country.
immigration. Yeah, exactly. So, and again, this isn't just Australia, this is pretty much everywhere.
It's pretty much all around the OECD countries.
So yeah, the lowest one here.
Although I am kind of a little bit curious as to whether that's also in non-OECD countries. That would be interesting to
It's
see.
certainly decreased. I mean, Saudi Arabia, that's one of the closest ones we've got here. India has decreased from like 5.5 children in 1970 down to 2.2 currently. So they're still above, but they're at like 1.5 billion people. So
yes,
they've got, you know, a bit of an issue either way. So Israel's still up around 3, and that's
yes, but
stable,
Israel
really, which is,
has a policy. Well,
multi-child policy.
Wait, no, I wasn't going to say a child policy, but there is a belief there of, you know what? I don't want to walk into that one. I'm going to step right back.
It's a different culture. There's some other.
It's a different worldly culture. It's a different desire.
Sure.
Yes, let's stick with that.
Stick with that. So, yeah. So I mean, related to that is this one where we've got income inequality. This one specifically for the US, but the red line here goes down from 1970 from 20% of the share of bottom 50% of adults getting less than like 15% of the wealth, or less than 15% of the income, while the top 1% are going way up to 20%, top 1%. So again, that may be again, this is one of the reasons I think it's a fairly economic reason that might be occurring. So people just can't afford to have kids. So again, it's one of the things I think the universal basic income might fix. So if you can make it, easier to live, people are going to have more babies.
Yes, well.
So, so again, the question for me is, okay, how much do we actually, I think the final goal should be, in terms of population, to be able to get it to a stable point. So the theory would be increase the benefits for children to the point where that becomes stable. And I really wanted to know your opinion on that idea.
There is a conversation around whether what population level we want for on a country by country basis and on a planetary basis. I think that while the conversation around should the UBI include children would of course impact the world population and the nation population question, I think by the time you've had a child, it's almost irrelevant, in that you've had the child. We as a society, we as parents and we as a society have a moral responsibility and obligation to look after that child, to put it in the best possible state it can be put in, to live a life, a fruitful life, a responsible life, a life where it can add to itself and its community. So yes, we've got the population question. Some people would be looking at the population question going, oh my gosh, we're not even managing replacement rate and making that into a big deal. And there are those who would be turning around and going, yeah, but if we increase the rate, then we increase the world population, and that will be a problem because of climate and this and that and the other. If that is, to my mind, an important conversation to have, but not one to have quite so closely linked with the UBI. Is it going to have an impact? Of course it will. Oh, well, can't say of course it will because it hasn't been tested out through experiments and research and all, but one would expect that it would have an impact. And so, is that the important question, or is the important question what's the impact that it would, how would a UBI enable a parent to better set up their child for life?
Sure.
That to me is the interesting question.
Sure. Again, you're talking qualitatively how to improve the quality of life, as opposed to...
What's the point of quantitative if it doesn't make for a better quality?
Exactly.
Have I got that round the right way, or have I got it? So you have to really think with those two
What's
words.
The point of quantitative analysis if it's not going to get the quality? Yeah.
Yep.
So I mean, yeah. So yeah, I've only got numbers for quantitative, unfortunately. So
numbers are handy. I told you.
Well, yeah, exactly. So I mean, this one's interesting.
I live my life in numbers, but
yeah, but you'd also know how much to trust them. So, so the female employment rate.
I think sometimes the thing we miss about numbers is that without context, they're completely nonsensical.
Yeah.
And we often don't put numbers in the context that they ought to be put in.
Sure. I mean,
we could probably explain that better, but okay.
Yeah. One of the huge contexts we're talking about in terms of UBI is in terms of poverty. So Australia, the rate of poverty, child poverty, is about 11.8%. And with 6 million children, that means 500,000 to 600,000 children officially live in poverty. So they'd be occasionally going without meals, wouldn't necessarily have enough money for clothes, that kind of thing, and occasionally miss out on electricity because people can't pay their power bills. So, and that's actually pretty much average for the OECD countries. So it means that if we implemented a UBI, that would pretty much disappear, hopefully. Which is
which one would disappear?
Well, the poverty.
Three?
So,
well, that's the intention, yes.
It's certainly one of the benefits that are recognized. Again, you're still going to have issues with mental health and whatnot for adults, but again, that requires another type of solution.
It's another solution, yeah.
Exactly. So, so that's that's one obvious benefit. And again, sorry, someone's interrupting me.
It happens.
It does. What was I going on about? Children in poverty, adults in poverty. Nope, it's gone. So the next one I've got here is some sort of
Actually, the last comment I thought was interesting and bearing question.
Mhm.
So can you bring up the previous slide again? Oh,
Sure.
slide, it's not a slide, the previous
Yeah.
page. Part-time work is an important feature of female employment in Australia. The
Mhm.
proportion of women that work part-time is 33% compared to an OECD of 21%.
Sure.
And I think we've so far been talking about children and adults and having them as a somewhat separate, but I can't help but wonder how many mothers and potentially fathers who would want to spend more time with their kids rather than less time. There's a conversation that goes on
Sure.
amongst women about that whole, like, when I'm at work, I feel guilty about not being with the kids. When I'm with the kids, I feel guilty about not giving time to work and not contributing to the household. And it's like, well, how much de-stressing would that do for women? Which means how much de-stressing would that do into the children? And therefore,
and health benefits all around.
Yeah. But
yeah, again, qualitative. Again, the only way to really find out is to implement and see what happens again. So
exactly. I'm still surprised going, I could have sworn it included children. When did I miss that memo?
Yeah, exactly. Which is exactly why I wanted to have this conversation. Yeah, so yeah, women being part-time employed, again, whether that would increase or not under a UBI, it would give people that option. So, and again, whether we would need to increase supplements for children is another question about that.
Yep.
So, so how much does it actually cost?
Yeah, how much does it cost in Australia? I'm presuming this is Australia.
Yeah, so
yes, it is.
Again, I've mainly focused on Australia. So, I mean, for other countries out there, it will vary, but you can sort of get an idea in comparison for income versus sort of the actual costs. So according to this one, which is just on finder.com, it's about $9,000 a year for 18 years. So comes up to about $160,000 overall. And they break it down, into, how much you spend on what: transportation, health, personal education, so on, and housing as well. So again, the number of 8,000 is about half of what you'd get from the UBI. So for a single person. So again, that's
so one of the conversations.
Yeah, I mean,
would be around, because there's that symbiotic relationship between children and their parents, whether the UBI with children would be at the same rate or less than that.
Yeah.
That would be a conversation that would need to be, well, that's a question that would need to be explored.
Yep.
Other questions that would need to be explored: is that something that would increase with age? Is that something, when do we transfer responsibility? Do we transfer it gradually? Because I get the image of drinking in countries where children are allowed to drink. They're not quite so crazy about it when they come of age and can drink. It's like, is it the same with money?
They're kind of used to it. Yeah, and it's I think the same kind of thing does happen with money. So potentially, if you're used to it earlier, great, you might blow it on a bunch of toys, but by the time you have it around constantly, you can sort of
you're hell bent on the fact that they blow it on a bunch of toys.
Well, I would. I mean, I blow crap on toys now, so, but they're kind of robots. I'm an engineer by trade, so I have expensive toys. A lot of guys do.
I think in my case, it would have been books.
Yeah.
And what else would I have spent? Like if I had, if as a child I would have had the money, where would I have spent it? I would have spent it in books. I don't know that you'd be able to spend that much in books.
Well, I mean, you've got the
that's where
obvious
my
stuff
pocket money
like,
would go.
you know, your food would be covered. You'd possibly
Yeah.
have rent covered, clothing, and basically that's all the basics. Again, universal basic income. That's what it's for.
This is for the basics, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. If you're saying they blow it all on lollies, well, then lollies aren't
Well, you blame
basic.
that on the parents. Yeah.
So that's
As
why
with
we're
everything
leaving it in the
else.
responsibility of the parents.
Exactly. And then this one, which is, I think it's from AMP. Their estimate ranged, so they give a much more detailed breakdown from low income people at about $86 per week for a 0 to 4 year old, up to $400 for an 18-year-old, $480. And for the high income people at the bottom there, or the top of the income range there, is $230 for a 0 to 4 year old, and up to $1,000 for an 18 to 24 year old. So it's interesting to look at that, given the ratio of sort of low income to high income. And one of the things I'm noticing here is that low income is a bit less than 10% of your income, and at a high income, it's less than 5%. So does it mean that rich people care less about their children? Or does it just mean that they have the money to spend on other things? And that's, the most you really need to be spending on your children to keep them, a happy, healthy life, sort of thing. So the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. So you can see that there's quite a big jump between like middle income, 133, the next 20% up is 160, and then there's like a $70 jump to the high income. So maybe they do get some nicer toys, but
I don't know, because there'd be a hell of a lot of detail hidden behind these numbers.
Yeah. So, so I mean, what that comes down to,
I'm a little reluctant to draw out any conclusions from what's being seen here.
A sarcastic tool, as I always am. So
I know.
Yeah, but other people don't. So just got to make that clear. So I mean, at a low income, $86 a week, roughly 100. So that's roughly $4,000 a year minimum. So that's like half of what the previous one did, which is an average, up to, if you're in a high income family, you're getting nearly $50,000 a year from your parents. So I don't think we should push it that high, but I think an absolute minimum, if we did look at childcare, child benefits, would be, the $4,000 a year sort of thing. So it sort of gives us a reasonable range to sort of look at in terms of how much and what that would cover. So I mean,
are you trying to establish what the amount of
what the minimum amounts would be, and whether we need to sort of offset that from everyone else, because hey, we want people to have children, but whether it should be at least.
What do you mean by offset from everybody else?
Well, if basically we're paying $4,000 per child, does that come out of their parents? So maybe the numbers we calculated before was $20,000. Maybe that should be $18,000. So plus the $4,000 for kids or something.
I have a problem with that way of thinking in the first place. We live in a country that has more than enough to more than comfortably house, feed, clothe every man, woman, and child.
And yet people are missing out.
Plenty left over.
Well,
so I don't like engaging in the tight-fisted conversation. I don't see the point of it. At the end of the day, where does the money need to go so that as a society, we are the best we can be?
Yep.
we've got the money. The question is, are we spending it where we should be spending it? No, let me rephrase that. We've got the money. The question is it being spent as a society? We've got the money. Is it being spent where the greatest benefit can be gotten?
Well, I agree. That's a great way to frame the question. And I think the answer is no.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, that's kind of how I designed my proposal. So you create money, put it where it's needed, and then remove money from where it ends up, which is where it's not needed. So it means you can always put money in where it's needed without completely crashing the system. Again, I sort of, we've already discussed this in another thing, but one of the things I sort of realized especially is that if you can scale the prices, it becomes less important about the overall number, but more about the income versus expense ratio. So it doesn't matter about the absolute number, you know, whether it's $10,000, $100,000, or $1 million a year that we're getting, as long as our needs come in at less than that. So the price.
Yes. Okay. If our needs come in at less than that, as I've said, we live in a society that more than comfortably produces way more than enough to comfortably house, feed, and clothe every man, woman, and child with dignity. So this is no longer a conversation of can we afford it? It shouldn't be. It hasn't been that conversation for decades. We've been at least in the OECD countries. I'm not going to turn around and say in the non-OECD countries, I don't know enough to be able to comment about the situation there. But I live here in Australia. I interact with the knowledge that comes to me comes predominantly from OECD. If we're continuing to have the conversation around how can we afford this, how can we afford this, how can we afford this, when we can't see that we can afford this, that to me is nuts. It's crazy.
Well, that's kind of where the hitch happens. The Australian government only pulls out $500 billion worth in tax. So to balance that with an extra $200, $300 billion.
I can't talk to you about the tax conversation because you and I, we've already established that you and I are on totally different planes when it comes to the economic conversation. You're not a believer in modern monetary theory. I am.
What, MMT?
Yes, MMT.
Actually, the thing I proposed is close to MMT, but there's the slight difference in terms of the cash tax. So what I'm finding is it's less important about taxing income as to taxing static cash. You can actually get rid of, with the proposal I've got, get rid of pretty much all of the tax, pay for everything out of the cash tax. Well, it gets a much more complicated question.
In both cases, the tax conversation is important.
Sure.
Whether you're a proponent of MMT or whether you're not a proponent of it, that's quite the tongue twister. Regardless, tax is going to be a conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is we can afford it. So,
well, the trouble is,
should we be turning around and having the tax conversation? I'm not so interested. I'm turning around going, we can afford it. What would we need? What would be the benefits? What would be the right rate? What are the implications of transitioning a child through from being completely looked after to suddenly dumping them with a whole heap of money? Those are considerations that need to be made. Does that mean that we need to go back over the research that's been done and check whether there has been anything done around the provision of funds for children? We're just not aware of it. I'm sure I've come across things where they're talking about when parents are given money, how they interact with it when they've got children. So those are things that we need to go back in and over, because there's no denying, to my mind, there's no denying it that it needs to be done. It's just like everything else, the logistics of it.
Well, like I said,
articulating the benefits, quantifying the benefits, and having the conversation from there.
Well, from where I'm sitting, certainly the social benefits, family for children are already fairly well justified in terms of the research that's out there. There's no question, right? We're talking. So again, it's not even an interesting
so wait a
question.
second. If
So
it's out there, then why hasn't it been? Why was the assumption? I mean, why is the conversation always about the UBI without the kids? Or apparently, because as I said, I just
UBI,
assumed they were automatically in there.
Yeah,
of course they'd be in there.
Yeah, I think it literally the only reason the UBI itself, whether with children or without children, hasn't been implemented is because people don't want to pay for it. Like I said, trying to get that kind of thing through government, who, they're there to balance the budget, allegedly.
I was listening to some really, really interesting podcasts about 2 or 3 days ago, where the conversation, it was talking about Brexit. And I know that we're jumping a little bit away, but the conversation was interesting because it was turning around and saying that there appears to be a disconnect between what the people want and what the governments are doing.
Oh, absolutely.
So when you're saying the people don't want this, do we actually mean the people don't want this?
The general population? No, I think most people, when they're talked to about it, do want it or need it, especially people at the bottom. There's mainly
not just people at the bottom. Believe me,
certainly people at the bottom do want it. But what I find mainly is that conservatives, especially, say basically no, giving people money is just a road to disaster. They're just going to waste it.
There is that concern.
But again, the same point is, those are the people who don't want to employ people anyway. So we have,
we could be a little meaner and say those are the people that want to pay the lowest possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same
fair.
thing. They're the people who seem to say, well, no. So certainly, whether that's 50% of the population or not, I'm not sure. I suspect it's a lot below that. But
it wouldn't be.
Those, I think a lot of those people are the wealthy. A lot of those people are the conservatives who have the money and don't want to pay for other people. So
I think that's an assumption, and I think
to a certain extent, but
I think that's an assumption because, well, going back to Henry Ford, he understood if the people didn't have the money, they can't buy your wares.
Yeah,
I think it's a very dangerous generalization to turn around and say the rich don't want this and the very poor do, or the poor do. It's making Australia out to be a divided, classless, rich and poor. We're not that.
Well, there's certainly divides there. I mean,
there is a divide, and and it is increasing. And Australia is in a much better position than
certainly
many other countries.
Yeah.
The idea is that if we start having conversations by separating people, like the rich want this and the poor don't, no, the other way around, whatever it is. If we start separating people out, it's going to create division.
Well, I mean, I know
that is absolutely not needed.
I know a bunch of people who are adamantly opposed to UBI for exactly the reason I stated. They said, no, we don't want to pay people if they're not going to work for it.
But that's the whole point, is that it opens up the conversations around, well, wait a minute, what is work? What if people can't work? Why is your assumption that the grand majority of people wouldn't work?
Yeah, and again, the research shows exactly the opposite. So that mentality, just, people just need to read their research more. Oh crap.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it comes down to. So the numbers are in for that kind of thing. It is vastly beneficial, but we need to get the government to basically allocate the money that is needed and pay it.
Oh, I'm going to put my foot in it, so maybe I won't speak.
Well, ultimately, that's what
actually,
the universal basic income is. It's like give people money because they know where they need it most. And again, the
yes.
vast majority of the money gets spent where it's needed. So we need to figure out a way. As far as I can tell, the only stumbling block is funding, which is why I'm sort of focusing on that as much in this conversation as every other one.
No, I think there's more to it than just funding.
Sure.
It's not, most people I talk to have never heard of the UBI. Once you explain it to them, they like it, but most people have never heard of the UBI. So if they haven't heard of it, how can they ask for something they don't know? I don't believe it to be a funding issue. I believe it to be a
just an awareness issue.
An awareness issue, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to believe with that because we've had, Andrew Yang over in the US touting it. And again, for me personally, it's like US presidential candidate who his running platform was.
Sorry.
Oh, you're being sarcastic, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm not, I don't do sarcasm very well.
Okay.
Actually, my best friend once turned around to me and said, one day you're going to do sarcasm, I'm going to fall off my perch.
You're going to do it properly. Okay, well.
I didn't mean
you
it
just
that
need
way.
more practice, Tom.
Yeah, that's all it is. Okay, try again. What I'm saying is that
sure.
Just about everyone I talk to has never heard of it. I hadn't heard of it prior to 2018.
Yeah. Well, again, I found out it when I was researching for my book, which was like 2014 to 2017. So it certainly does seem to be a big thing, but again,
I think maybe we've fallen into that. I'm looking to buy a car. I'm looking to buy a red. I don't know. Give me the make of a car. Help me out here.
Ferrari, Ford.
There's something maybe that's not quite. I don't know. No, I'm not going to say anything. Whatever I say in car makes, I'll be made fun of. So my brother would be so disappointed.
Oh well.
But you know what I'm trying to say. You decide you want to buy a particular kind of car, and suddenly it's everywhere. Is it a case of you're thinking it's well known because you now know about it, you're seeing it everywhere, when in reality it's still not part of the
it's still not part of the real world outside our imagination, sort of thing. But again, it certainly has been getting wider out into the world. I look back and there's actually a proposal for it from back in 2016 in Parliament. And again, I think that's this feedback loop where politicians don't want to promote anything that is not going to get people on board, and people aren't going to think about things that aren't actually being talked about, in the general media. So you sort of get that feedback loop where nobody wants to talk about it.
Given some of the laws that I've recently found out have gone through, I would disagree with that analysis.
So, well, part of what we're doing here is trying to get the conversation out. So I don't know how much effect that has. But certainly, in my experience, there's a lot of people who are just fundamentally opposed to it. And
look, there are people who, of course, there are people who are fundamentally opposed to it. Of course, there will be. They're the ones who. There are those who believe that if you give people money, that they're just going to squander it. So, of course, if that's someone's mentality, they're going to be opposed to it. If it's I don't know how to. Are we? Too many thoughts in one go. Try again. Yes, there are those who are going to be opposed to it, but people are going to be opposed to anything that is proposed. It's just the nature of things. You bring a new technology in, you get the 10% who are the early adopters. Once you've hit the 12.5%, it suddenly gets accelerated and there's really huge take-up of it. And then you've got the last 10% that are opposed.
Holdouts and never get it anyway.
The holdouts, yes.
Yeah.
and that's going to be the case in just about anything that is proposed.
Well,
So
the trouble is with a democracy, you've got this 50% margin before you can get anything in. So
I
that's a big
sometimes wonder
stumbling block.
whether we need to have a rethink of what the word democracy means.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm less and less
So
convinced
maybe
that
the
it's a
way
good
we,
idea.
maybe the way we word that is that you, in the way democracy currently functions in Australia, you'd need a 50% agreement.
Sure,
And
yeah.
my question would be is, do we really believe we wouldn't get more than 50%?
That's a good question. I think,
I mean, we've seen the research that's come through from Anglicare, and it had a 70%.
70% of Australians allegedly would support,
yes,
or at least would not oppose the UBI.
And the Anglicare, yes, and the Anglicare one is the one that I'm familiar with, but I know that there's been at least 2 or 3 other surveys to that effect.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Now,
it's pretty solid research, yet we still don't have this movement. And again, why not? Is it because there's the conservative backlash? Is it because people simply don't know?
no, I think it's because we don't believe that we have a say in our own parliament. And that's opening up a political conversation. But
well, the other weird idea is, are people
it's
double
really
guessing?
Sorry?
The other weird idea is, are people double guessing? They say, I don't think somebody, I don't think my constituents would think that this is a good idea. That
Quite
kind of thing.
possibly. There's a really good what do you call it, documentary, called a 2-part documentary called The Big Deal.
Yeah.
It is really worth watching. And it's just I live in a building. I own an apartment in a building that's made up of 242 apartments. And trying to get anything done in here is really hard. And it's just, you feel like, it's felt like you get lost in the numbers.
Voice in the wind.
Yeah, it's an issue that societies, as we get bigger in numbers, that how do you set systems in place that enact the will of the people? And
well, even it's not just the majority of people. You've got to get it down to the point where individuals have the power, sort of, to a certain extent, to make changes in their own lives. And even if that means, getting laws changed, that's really difficult. The other problem is, are most people just not interested in the conversation?
I don't believe that most people are not interested in the conversation. The feel I get, and it's one person's opinion, so I don't have the research around this. The feel I get when I interact with people is, yeah, this is wrong, but I can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
So I am going to look after me and my own, because there's not much else I can do.
Yeah.
So as I said,
individual empowerment, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, it's getting on to an hour. That
didn't take that long. Oh, geez, that went by quick.
Yeah, so I want to try and write some of this down a bit and see if we can release this along with the thing. So just trying to summarize some of the topics we've talked about. I mean, I showed you the population distribution. So population basically in OECD countries is decreasing. A UBI might help that. The cost of cost of raising a child. It's from about 4,000 Australian dollars with an average of about, what was it, 9,000. And that's compared to proposed UBIs of around 20,000. So so I brought the idea of like offsetting I'll say probably not. I mean, a separate child fund level for UBI. Excuse my typing. I'd say we're a maybe on that one.
Yeah. We'd need to know a lot more before we'd be able to answer that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to
Although
say
that could just be me and I have to know everything before I'm ready to move. Apparently that's part of my personality. So who knows?
Again, and what I say is well, experiment.
Yeah. Research.
Certainly from the research that's been around, it's shown to be socially beneficial. So there's minimal downsides.
Yeah.
So the main problem from our discussion is we seem to think is getting people to be aware of I mean, in terms of your rich people, poor people thing, yeah, certainly there's a bunch of people.
No, I wouldn't put it to a rich, but I wouldn't divide it up between poor and rich. I just getting people to be aware
well, I'm just
of it.
thinking it's like Elon, you know, Zuckerberg, they're all people who've said, yes, UBI is probably a good necessary thing.
Well, wait a second. If they've said that, why in God's name didn't earlier in the conversation did you make it?
Well, I think there's a lot of, I mean, these guys are tech guys. So I think, again, the word I use is conservative. So, I mean, literally conservative party of politics. I think those people are the people who tend to be certainly less inclined to
yes,
you know,
but funnily enough, my understanding is that conservative people also tend to be more altruistic. So there's a dichotomy there. That's an interesting one to explore. Maybe not for this, no, maybe not for now, but I think it's too divisive. I don't like the conversation that way. I won't have it that way.
Yeah. So do we need to add anything else in here? So this is sort of a
I think I know you're saying a UBI has shown to be socially beneficial, minimal downsides. It just needs a little bit more to sort of say, to clearly indicate that a well looked after,
oh, hang on. I've got to find my.
What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that looking, if we put parents in a position where they're able to look after their children well, that the upside is quite substantial, not just for the child, but for society as a large. And to me, that doesn't.
Well, I usually go to Scott Satan's Santen's little graphic, which I've got somewhere if I can ever find the damn thing, which just gives a list of all the benefits and pictures, not the ones I want. Nope, can't find the flipping thing. I'll have to put it in later.
Okay.
So, but yeah, how do you? feel about that? Have we gone over anything useful? Has anything been resolved for you?
Oh, nothing's been resolved. It's just great to be able to articulate things. It's just like, oh my gosh, there was so much floating around up there.
Well, I mean, what we can do
Didn't
then
even know
is
it.
invite other people to look. We're trying to put this on YouTube, so if you want to put more comments on things, and I'll try and get this document up. I might not let people
Okay.
edit it directly, but I'll let them put comments on it. So
Yep.
that could be good. And yeah, we'll promote ourselves a little bit and say, hey, let's go visit ubiaustralia.org. There's a conference coming up at the end of the year, BIEN, Basic Income Earth Network. That's another really good organization. And I'm trying to write up a couple of papers to propose in there to get this whole shebang going. And yeah, so I hope everyone out there enjoyed this little chat of ours, and we'll try and get things going. Yeah. So